Have you sat down to write and before the words arrive you ask, is this safe to say, or is this even worth the risk? Have you noticed that you've started to second guess your prose or are even more hesitant with your ideas? Hey, co-authors. In this episode, we'll talk about what it means to keep writing your research when scrutiny feels a little sharper, stakes feel a little higher, and self-censorship can quietly replace curiosity. This conversation isn't about being provocative for its own sake. It is about writing with intention, clarity, and purpose when the ground feels unstable. So let's dive in. So I don't know if you're a listener who's in the United States or somewhere else in the world, but as you might imagine, with a lot of the way that the world is moving right now, I think for researchers in just about every field, whether you're in natural sciences, social sciences, humanities, whatever it might be, I think we're all feeling a little bit more pressure about what types of ideas that we put out there and the types of research that we're doing. I know that for myself, I've been writing in areas of qualitative research, critical theory, especially as it relates to things like race and class and gender. And even within this past year, I was invited to write a chapter in a handbook on critical race theory. And the first thing that went through my mind was, is this the right moment to write something like this? I will say I did write the chapter and it's published now and it's out there and people can see it. But I feel like every year that I've been writing, I've been asking my questions a little bit more and a little bit more. And so whether you're doing work on climate science or gender or DEI or anything else, there seems to be more scrutiny and there seems to be more backlash for those types of ideas. And so in this episode, what I want to talk about is how to address those, how to make sure that you're keeping true to your purpose and making sure that your writing is impactful, even in times whenever it seems like things are stacked against you. So let's dive in.
Are you interested in mastering scholarly writing, developing productivity, and increasing impact, all while staying healthy? Then welcome to the Publishing Academic Research Podcast. My name is Dr. Kyle Ruddick, and I'm a full professor and writing coach who's dedicated to making sure you break through whatever is stopping you from reaching your scholarly goals. I meet so many scholars who have creative, innovative, and daring ideas, but can never seem to get those projects from proposals to print. I want you to get your work in the hands of people who will read it and appreciate it. So let's get into this week's big idea.
So before we begin, I think it's important to note that this type of climate that we're experiencing is not new. Especially if you're a US-based scholar, a lot of the rules and norms that we've developed around ideas like academic freedom and the idea of pursuing knowledge for knowledge's sake and the deference that has usually been shown by federal and state governments for institutions of higher learning to pursue knowledge has really arisen out of very dark times in U.S. history, culminating in McCarthyism and the Red Scare and the mass exodus and blacklisting of people from all sorts of jobs, including actors and journalists, but also academics. And I think over the past 40 or 50 years, higher education has really kind of settled in to a lot of those norms and has enjoyed a lot of deference in those things. But in the past 10 years or so, we've seen an increasing amount of encroachment and an increasing amount of backlash from the public about the types of things that we're doing. In my own life, for example, maybe about 5 or 10 years ago, I published an article and the topic was about racism in higher education. And the next thing I know, I'm being lambasted by all sorts of right-wing media influencers like Milo Yiannopoulos and written about in an editorial to the Wall Street Journal. Newt Gingrich took a swipe at me, and all these things are going on. And what you find out is that there is actually very little appetite on the part of this manufactured crisis and this manufactured outrage to actually have cooler heads prevail and to really talk about your ideas. And in fact, all of this is swirling around while you have people calling for your job, demanding that your university fire you. You're getting threats in the mail to yourself, to your family, to the things that you hold dear, and you're getting all sorts of social media backlash, and it is a really tough time. So whenever I talk about this backlash and the things that you need to do, I am very much speaking from a place of experience. It is not a fun thing to go through, and unfortunately, it will feel like in some ways that the truth is not a shield. But I'm here to tell you that it is in many ways, and that is important for us to hold on to that and to keep moving forward with the type of work that we're doing. That being said, I want to first sort of address what I think is probably the most negative part about this type of climate that we find ourselves in. And that is, I think a lot of the problems that we are seeing is not necessarily in outright banning of certain types of speech. Now, again, especially in the United States, probably in other parts of the world as well, there is an increasing encroachment from state and federal governments. The way that grants have been changed to ban certain types of words from even appearing, to websites dedicated to watch lists of dangerous professors, to local chapters in communities whose sole job it is to provoke professors in the classroom and try to create social media movements that make us look bad. All these things are going on, right? And on one hand, those things are about banning certain ideas, but more than that, they are about chilling our expression. They are about making sure that whenever you get the chance to sit down and write, you think to yourself, well, should I use that word? Well, maybe I should use a different word. Or should I pursue that idea? Well, maybe I'll have better luck with funding or better luck with publication if I do this other idea. Or if I publish this thing, then, that's going to get out. And next thing I know, I'm going to have a bunch of villagers with pitchforks and flaming torches at the gates calling for my head. And so all of this creates this sort of second guessing atmosphere and this chilling effect that tells us that it's safer to pursue certain ideas rather than others, to couch our ideas in certain ways. And unfortunately, what history tells us is that none of those things are in fact antidotes to the problem, not on a systemic level, and even not on an individual level. Right? Increasingly, what this type of movement is going to demand is more and more ideological purity, which in turn means that huge swaths of knowledge then not pursued either because they are outright banned or because people are just afraid to even pursue those things and are chilled away from those types of topics. One of the ongoing problems with this is that this type of chilling climate creates this ongoing culture of stress and anxiety because you're always anticipating backlash. You are afraid that your work is going to be misinterpreted either intentionally or even if it's accidentally, that accidental misinterpretation is going to somehow lead to consequences and that your institution might not have your back at the end of the day as it pertains to protecting your academic freedom and your right to pursue knowledge. With all that in mind, the first thing that I will say is that you do not have to think to yourself that you need to do some sort of grand gesture, that you necessarily need to, write in a way that is inflammatory or provocative, but instead you just sitting down and writing and doing your work well in a type of climate and culture that wants to silence certain types of ideas, that you sitting down and doing the good work of your research is in of itself an important act of resistance, that those who are in power want you to not talk about certain things. You talking about those things is important, not just for now, not just in this moment, but for the trajectory of human knowledge and human history. That's what we are as academics. We are curators of human knowledge, and it's up to us to keep it and preserve it and to add on to it. And so whenever someone tells us that we can't or shouldn't do that, or that to do that is going to lead to consequences and we shy away from that responsibility, that's not just bad for us now, it's bad for everyone coming after us. So you sitting down and just doing the work of your research is important. So if writing is important, then how do we do that in this type of atmosphere and this type of political climate? So I've got 4 things that I think are important for you to think about to make sure that you are contributing in a way that is strategic and sustainable. And I think both of those things are important because I can't tell you how many times I see something published in either academic literature or in popular media or whatever it is. And yeah, they use very strident tones and it's very pathos laden and it's, riling people up, but there's just enough gaps in the logic of the argument that it ends up looking foolish. It looks hasty, it looks ill-considered, and as a result, it allows itself to be used then as a straw person argument for those who would do harm to the type of work that we're doing. So that type of hastiness is not conducive. Also, it needs to be sustainable. There is every indicator that what we are witnessing right now is not a blip on the political radar, but is instead a ongoing shift in global politics that might be changing the way that the world orders itself over the next 50 years. And if that's the case, then we have a long ride ahead of us. And so it's really important that we are taking care of ourselves, because if we are caretakers of knowledge, we have to make sure that we are taken care of so that way we can do that work. So what are some things that are important to think about? First, I think it's important to distinguish between risk and discomfort, right? I don't want to be alarmist. I don't want people to think that the sky is falling. But also, as someone who has gone through this, I can tell you that it is not fun. It's not fun to be pilloried and attacked on all sides by people who do not know you, do not care to know you, and do not care to know your work, and have it misconstrued and twisted so that way it does not even resemble the thing that you have written. That being said, just because an idea is uncomfortable does not mean that it is necessarily risky. In my time as an editor, I have had people who have been in very secure positions, in very secure states and institutions, tell me that they don't want to write something because they're afraid that it might get them in trouble at their job. While I recognize that everyone is differently privileged in the ways that they navigate academia and society, especially here in the United States, and especially depending on what state that you are in, tenure is granted precisely so that way we can do this type of work. So just because you're uncomfortable making an argument, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are in actuality at risk. And what I would say is that what is unfortunate is that the people who I perceive as having a lot of shields, both institutional and identity-wise, making choices to not speak out on these things, those are precisely the types of people who should be on the front lines speaking out about how climate denialism is wrong, that anti-DEI measures are really just racist and sexist attacks that are being Trojan horsed into our discourse, and that there's a whole bunch of wrong-headed attacks that are being made, none of which are in good faith. And yet these people keep their heads down in the hope that this will all pass over and that they won't have to deal with it. But that's not the case here, right? We have to say something about this. That being said, I've had other folks who they're at institutions where they're at-will employees. Maybe they're adjuncts, term faculty who are not tenure track. Maybe they're at private institutions. And of course, there's all sorts of other identities outside of the institution that might make someone particularly at risk. I get it, right? You find where you can do things. But I think that we should all be having a candid assessment with ourselves on whether what we're feeling is actually danger, is actually risk, or is it just that we're uncomfortable. We don't want to shine light on ourselves. We don't want to be a target. We don't want people to think that we're being too vigorous in our defense of our jobs and of this idea of what academia and higher education should be. Because if the latter is the case, then I'm afraid that now is the time that you do not have the luxury for that type of thinking, and you need to start really doing a more candid assessment. The second thing that I would say is that you really need to make sure that you are anchoring your research in rigorous analysis. The more at risk your area of investigation is, whether that's climate science, whether that's about DEI stuff, whether that's about gender, whatever it is, those types of areas are going to increasingly demand that you are practically perfect in every way on your type of research. And no, that's not fair that other types of research may not be scrutinized in quite the same way that yours is. But that's why the work that you're doing is so important. As I was saying before, it's not helpful whenever scholars really get out there and they start being very strident and very vocal about things, but then their analysis doesn't really back up the things that they're saying. And all of a sudden they're having to recant, they're having to backtrack, they're having to hedge. All those sorts of things make our analysis and make our work look weaker and invite the types of attacks that we're getting. And so, unfortunately, we are in a time whenever the types of work that we're doing demands that we are extra careful and that we're extra particular about our findings and about the implications of those things. So that way we can inform the public, inform our students, and keep our credibility as we're pushing back against this type of anti-intellectualism. The other thing I would say is that it's really important to write with the idea that you are writing for the long haul and not for any one particular moment. I think obviously that this is in some ways kind of dictated by the type of scholarship that you do. Some forms of scholarship are more immediate, whether that's public-facing scholarship like writing for a news outlet or doing types of analysis that are addressing things that are going on right now in the world. But I also think that it's very easy whenever we're under attack to get stressed, to get emotional and angry and frustrated, and that bleeds into our writing, and then we end up overstating our claims and really creating a sort of caricature of ourselves. There is a time to be strident and a time to be vocal and a time to be chaotic and emotional and angry and all those things. But it's not every time, right? You have to have the wisdom to discern when you can really go hard and when you have to back off. And so as you're writing your stuff, I think it's important to do that candid self-evaluation about your prose and about the things that you're writing so that way you can make sure that you're being impactful. The last thing that I would say is that it's really important for you to recognize that there are other people doing this work and who have been doing this work for a long time. A lot of scholars from marginalized background have been doing this work. Scholars from different countries have been doing this work. And a lot of scholars from around the globe have been dealing with governments that are more or less invested into the idea that academics should have freedom to pursue and build on knowledge. And so if you find yourself in a situation where you're having to deal with that, you can look to other scholars, other communities, and know that you don't have to go through this alone. Again, if you're here in the States, there's all sorts of organizations for this. The AAUP is the National Union for Academics, and they do incredible work on behalf of faculty. You may have heard in the wake of Charlie Kirk's murder that a number of professors got fired because of social media posts. And a lot of those folks are in court right now. Some of them have even won and been reinstated with damages because what they did was protected speech. So it's important for you to recognize that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here and that you're not alone. There's all sorts of communities and organizations that are out there to help you. Get plugged into them, start volunteering, start being a part of those things, start reading about them, and really get involved because that's going to be how we are able to protect ourselves and protect each other is by making sure that we are not lone little islands of expertise that are easily snuffed out, but instead we are gathered together, we're helping each other, we're supporting each other, and we're all burning a little bit brighter because of that. The last thing I'll say as I wrap this up is that it's important for you to be careful and committed to this. In my estimation, I think that this is going to be a marathon and not a sprint for many of us as it relates to the type of work that we do and the type of pushback that we are going to see over the coming decades. And so making sure that you're doing a candid assessment of the risks of doing this type of writing, of making sure that you are protected, make sure that, as an individual, maybe you save a little bit more money in your bank account so that way, if you end up getting fired and you have to wait for a lawyer to come litigate your way back into a settlement or back into your job, you're not out in the streets because you can't pay your mortgage or you can't pay your rent, that you make sure that you have backup plans for health care and child care and all sorts of things. And again, I don't mean to be alarmist. I don't want you to think that I'm trying to peddle fear here, but I also think that a professorate that is unprepared is a professorate that's vulnerable. And I don't want you all to be vulnerable to the types of people who have no knowledge and even less interest in knowing the types of things that we do and the importance of our work. Those are not the people that we should be cowing to and not the types of people that we should be giving up the stewardship that we have been entrusted with in this profession. And so if you are having a hard time right now, you feel a little anxious, you feel like things might be, you're feeling a little cautious one way or the other, please reach out to the people around you. Make sure that you're connecting with your colleagues in your department and in your discipline. Make sure that you're keeping up with your discipline's professional conferences. What is it that they're saying? What is it that they're doing in order to protect their memberships? Make sure that you're reaching out to organizations like the AAUP. And if you just need someone that you just want to talk to and feel like you just want to vent about the fears and frustrations that you're having right now, you can always reach out to me. I don't charge people for the first 30 minutes of talking to me. So if you're just like, hey, I'm just having a rough go of it right now, I'm really worried and I don't feel totally safe and I just want to talk to someone about it and never see them again. So that way I can feel good about just unloading and unburdening on someone and then just go on with my life. Hey, that's what I'm here for, man. I'm happy to do that for you. I think it's important that we support each other. I'm happy to be a part of that support network for you. So take care of yourselves. Thank you for listening. And again, I'll see you next week's episode.
Hey, co-authors, what's stopping your best ideas from becoming your next big publication? Brilliant research shouldn't die in your drafts folder. Now's the time to bridge the gap between the possible and the published. You can support this podcast by subscribing to it, leaving a positive review, assigning it to your classes, or sharing it with a colleague. Let me know what I can do to make this the best podcast resource for you. And if you'd like to know more about my writing coach services, then you can find my information in the podcast description and set up an appointment. I'll be back next week with another episode. But until then, keep healthy, keep writing, and don't let reviewer 2 get you down.